welcome back to Fresh Faces, New Ideas. My name is David, and if you like the channel, you like the content that I do, please like, subscribe, or feel free to follow me on Twitter at Faces Ideas, or you can listen to me on the Center Left Radio podcast. So, this video is going to be covering HR 1, or the For the People Act, or if you're Republican, or For the Swamp, or whatever craziness that they're calling it. So this is a really big bill. There's a lot of stuff into it. I've spent a lot of time trying to find out like each individual argument against it, and then going back through and discussing it in full. I don't know if I hit them all. If you see this video and then you have a comment about it, something I missed, feel free to comment on it. Feel to drop me a DM. If I get enough arguments about it, I'll do a deep dive into the specific things that people think that I missed. But I think I got most of them. Or at least the big ones that I think are the most important. But if not, then feel free, and I'll do a follow-up. I'll just respond more. The point of this is to discuss this specific piece of legislation and how, the good and the bad. So HR 1 is designed to help make elections fair. It's to push for less money in elections, both dark and corporate money. It's to expand voting rights. It's to ungerrymander. It's to just push for the country to be more democratic, which is vitally important now because currently there are somewhere between 165 and 200 voter suppression bills or voter protection bills, but they're designed specifically to take the right to vote away from people, being processed through, I think it's like 30 states. So the For the People Act, HR 1, will counteract a lot of that and allow Americans' elections to be more free and more fair. So part of the reason there's so many voter ID and or voter suppression laws is currently because of the big lie that Donald Trump and the Republican Party is pushing, is that the election was rigged, and therefore we need to produce these laws in order to make sure that the elections are fair and that they can be counted on the American people to trust them. The problem with that is twofold. So one, there's no evidence that the election was rigged. There's no evidence that there's widespread voter fraud. There is no evidence, period, that there is widespread voter fraud ever. It's so rare, and I've done a video on this before, that it's basically non-existent. Every single study that has looked at it has found its non-existence. Even Donald Trump's own, he had a commission for it run by Chris Kobach, and they couldn't find it. They disbanded because they couldn't find anything. So then the counterpoint is, well, Americans don't believe that this election was fair. But the reason they don't believe that is because they were lied to. So if you make up a lie and then people believe you lie, and then you use your lie to suppress people's vote, you're still lying. You're still wrong. It doesn't make it truthful because you convince a whole bunch of people that they're right without evidence. So I'm going to go with some of the biggest issues that I found and just talk about them and how to counteract them, whether I think they're accurate or not. So one of the first ones is this is called the For the Swamp bill. They're going to say that it allows taxpayers to fund campaigns instead of that's the argument. They said, it's going to allow people to use taxpayer funded campaigns. And now this is obviously misleading, and it's not correct. So what it does is it allows for Congress to change the government's matching rules. So if I'm running for Congress and you give me $1 under HR 1, the federal government will then give me $6 to match that. So this allows people who are first time running for Congress, or who aren't multimillionaires or who aren't billionaires, to run for Congress and match the huge donations. Like a lot of the problem is, unless you hit like a huge viral moment, or you're running against a truly unpopular candidate, or you have a lot of backing from one of these groups, whether it's the DCCC or Justice Democrats, or some of these groups where you have an explosion, or the way to get your message out there, it's very difficult to run for Congress. It costs a lot of money, and a lot of the reasons that the people who stay in Congress are there forever is because they're multimillionaires and they can afford to run cycle after cycle in order to do this. So this allows for people who more middle class and lower class, middle class and poorer people to run for Congress. It also gives them a salary. So there was this other argument that it gave up to $600,000 extra to Congress people. However, this is not true. What it does is it allows for candidates to take an income, whatever their current income is, or up to $175,000 based on campaign donations. That's what they were allowed to take out for. Because, like I said, it's very difficult to run for Congress. It's very expensive, and this is a way to navigate it to allow people to be able to still live. It also helps cover for childcare, for Medicare, and for like parents' housing to help them. So you can actually focus on running and not spend all your time worrying about, will I have enough money to live while I try to run. Furthermore, the argument that this uses taxpayer dollars is a good argument, because now you know who's supporting you. So if I'm running and I'm running under this bill, and you can see that I'm getting most of my money from this bill. So let's say I raise $5,000. This will give me $30,000 in response. So you can see that my money is coming from the people. It's not coming from Walmart or ExxonMobil. I'm literally working for you because you can see who's funding me. And that's a good thing. So the people are like, the taxpayers are funding campaigns. That's what we should have. We should have some type of federally funded campaign, or people funded grassroots campaigns. There's a reason that during the presidential campaign, Bernie Sanders had the money. And it wasn't because he was getting the mega donors. It's because people were excited about his message, and they were the small dollar donations, and they were going to him. And that's why he broke all the fundraising records. It's part of the reason people like AOC are so popular. It's part of the reason why they're able to build these grassroots movements, and they're able to do these things, is because of grassroots power. This would allow for more candidates like that, more candidates to build grassroots movements and not have to worry about, going to all these corporations or these lobbyists in order to get money in order to run. So they literally would work for you. So there's that one. Another big one is this argument that it bans voter ID laws. So the problem with voter ID laws is they don't work for what their intended thing is. Because the argument is, you need voter ID. You need an ID to get cereal or coffee or whatever. Who's ever used an ID to get cereal? It's absurd. Anyway, the argument is you need voter ID to stop voter fraud, which, like I already said, and has been repeated over and over by thousands and thousands of people and hundreds of studies, voter fraud is exponentially rare. It is very rare that it ever happens, period. So what ends up happening with voter ID laws is it works as a way to suppress the vote, because people then can't get this ID. And you say, well, it's so easy to get an ID, but there's more to that. So the most common use of an ID is a driver's license. However, there's millions of people who don't have them, whether they're elderly, they don't drive, they're in cities, they're in areas where they've shut down the DMVs. This is another way that voter ID is used to suppress people. Is you create the ID, you create the way to vote, you create a hurdle to voting, and then you create hurdles to get to that. Furthermore, it costs money. A lot of people don't have it. You need to have certain documentation. So let's say if you're from Puerto Rico and you're trying to vote, and you can vote because Puerto Ricans are technically Americans, even though they don't have, they're considered a territory, similar to the same way people in D.C., the District of Columbia, are considered Americans, even though they're not a state either. Although that's one of the other things in this bill, but I'll get to that later. So having voter ID laws just makes it more difficult for people to vote. So what this bill does is it doesn't ban voter ID laws, but it says if you have a person who doesn't have an ID, they can get a sworn affidavit saying that I am who I say I am under perjury, under threat of perjury, that this is, like, my name is this, and I'm eligible to vote, and I can be perjured, I can go to jail if this is wrong. So furthermore, this is actually hold on, let me get the direct quote for this. This is actually a common practice used in several states. And since the vast majority of voters have identification to carry it with them, it is rarely used. But this alternative can be important for those few eligible voters that might have difficulty meeting restrictive identification requirements. So this whole thing is, what it does is it allows for You can still have your voter ID laws. You can still have them. They're still wrong. And a lot of times they're targeted with surgical precision in order to remove people from voting. But this says, look, if there's a dozen hurdles or you're just unable to do it because the Puerto Rico point I was making before, I don't know if I finished it, was they got rid of all their birth certificates before 2010. So that would mean nobody from Puerto Rico would have a birth certificate who would be eligible to vote. So if that's something you need for the documentation, or if you're bad for the documentation, or you've lost it, or something else has happened, you wouldn't be able to get these IDs, or it would cost too much money. So this would allow for that small minority of people who are unable to have the IDs or can't get them to vote and under perjury. Now let's talk about this once more. Voter ID laws and that type of vote, to argue that type of voter fraud, is ridiculous because it's one vote. And it's not worth this idea that there's this rampant voter fraud is not worth the penalties for falling into this. All right, so let's see. What are some other arguments? It prevents voter roll purges. So the argument is, we got to purge the voter rolls because there's dead people voting, or people have moved, or they're not in this, or they whatever the other. So it doesn't do that. It does not ban voter roll purges. What it does is it sets a standard. It says whatever this is, we're going to create a standard for it, and it's going to be available to the public so everyone can see what happens. What the criteria to be removed from the voter roll is. It also makes it more difficult for groups to just willy-nilly bring cases. So basically, what it says is, if you're not like an actual law enforcement, or if you're not a congressperson or someone in the federal government bringing a case to argue why this person needs to be removed from the voter rolls, you have to have direct knowledge of this person, why they need to be removed, whether they're dead or they moved, or whatever reason your reasoning is. And if you don't have that, then you're potentially coming to perjury. So that way you can't just make up false claims in order to get people removed from the voter rolls. And this is how you end up with claims like, more people voted in Detroit than live there, which just wasn't true. So you can, so this doesn't get rid of it doesn't get rid of IDs, it doesn't get rid of voter roll purges. It allows both of those things, but it makes them more open to the federal to the public, so you can see what exactly the criteria is, and they can see, how are they removing people from the voter rolls, how are they creating these voter ID rules. So this next part is two-part, but it's under the same idea. So it allows murderers or rapists and 16, 17-year-olds to vote. Now I put this under one category because it's the same kind of wrong thinking. So the murder and rapist thing, this is the same argument that they had in Florida in 2018, and they have in a whole bunch of other states. So what it allows felons to regain their rights to vote. So as it stands now, there's about 20 states that have some variation of once you're out of prison, like if you go into prison, you finish your sentence, you're out of prison, you can restore your voter rights either by actually two of them, Vermont and Maine, say that even while you're in prison, your voter rights are not removed. So you still have the right to vote while you're in prison there. The other states, some variation of, if you're on parole, if you have, I know there was the court fees or something similar to that, or you need to, wait a couple of years or something, or you need a pardon from the governor. But the problem with the last one, the pardon from the governor, is like we saw in Florida, if the governor just chooses not to give a lot of pardons to people who would qualify for it, they're just effectively not able to vote anyway. So what this bill does is it helps expand that. So it's not letting murderers and rapists vote. That's not true, because they would not have the right to vote unless they're in those specific states that allow you to vote while you're in prison. And there was an amendment for that put by Cori Bush that would allow people in prison to still vote. And this will be, she's pushing in the right direction to allow them to still vote while they're in prison, because but we're not at that point. So right now the first step has to be, once you're out of prison and once you have, if you haven't committed violent, because this argument, you're gonna allow rapists and murderers to vote. Well, they would be in jail, and they wouldn't be the ones who would get out to get under this provision. So they could not vote even under this provision. So that's just a scare tactic to prove that you're wrong. I mean, you're just wrong on that. That's not how it works. The other thing is allowing 16-year-old to vote. So what it does is it allows for same-day registration for pre-registration. So if I'm a 16 or 17-year-old, I'm allowed to register at a polling place for when I turn 18. And part of the other thing this bill does is allow for universal voter registration. So once you turn 18, you would be automatically registered to vote. So pre-registration would allow for a 16 or 17-year-old to vote, or not to vote, to register to vote. So that way, let's say I turned 16 and or in 2020, whenever the previous election was, or I turned 16 in 2022 and I want to register now, so that when in 2024 comes around, I don't have to actually register. I'm already in the system. That's what this would allow to do. They can't vote because they're still 16 and 17. They're still too young to vote. And the argument about, it's same day voting and now they don't have voter ID. They just registered that they're 16. They just registered. You just saw them do it. You did it. They're not going to vote, go turn around and vote. That's just absurd. One of the other arguments is it allows for 15 days of voting and for absentee ballots for up to 10 days after the election. So this is two parts. The second one was an argument during the last election. It's also it wasn't accurate then. It's still not accurate now. So the 15 days of voting. So what it does is it allows for early voting for a 2-week period prior to the election. And this is good. So there's two reasons for this. One, because we don't have a holiday for the election, it is harder for people who work jobs or work 40-hour jobs or work full time or work in certain communities to vote without like 8-hour voter lines or all this. So what it does is by expanding the amount of time that you can go to the polls and you can vote, it allows you to cut down the lines on election day when the actual voting takes place there. It also allows people who have jobs where it's harder for them to go vote, whenever they can, so they have more time to vote. So even on top of this, election day should be a national holiday because that would allow more people to vote anyway, and having these 15 days would cut down on that. So for the absentee ballot thing, this is very similar to what happened during 2020, was if your ballot is postmarked before the election or up to election day, it has 10 days to arrive. So if we end up with a situation where, God forbid, the mail is slow on purpose, or they cut down on certain mailing, or you mismarked it, or something happened where you mailed it, you mailed it days before the election happened, but it was slowed down, or if you did overseas ballots, absentee ballot, and it came, the day after, a couple days after, your vote would still count. It just gives them, it's the same thing with the 15 day voting. It gives a wider range for people who are either through no fault of their own or through circumstances that they can't control, their vote did not show up directly on election day. And this idea that came out from the 2020 election that we have to know the winner on election night is just ridiculous. It tends to happen that way because it's projections. It's not like they're projecting that this is going to be. They don't have all the votes counted. So we don't normally have it all on election day anyway. Like in 2016, they didn't finish counting till December. So having this time to get all the votes in and to allow for people to vote earlier cuts down on the time that it would take them on the back end to vote or to count the votes, because we already have them now. We've seen the people. The other thing is one of the things it does is it sets a standard for gerrymandering. So states would no longer be able to like the state legislator would not be in charge of setting up gerrymandering. What would be in charge would be a nonpartisan third party, and they would be in charge of setting up the districts, and in this way we would get districts that were actually fairer and built correctly. So for example, hold on. Look at these districts. This is absurd. Especially this first one. Like how you tell me that this is an acceptable way to draw a district? What is this? I mean, this one's kind of okay, but like look at all these. This is how you pick your voters, and part of what the the bill would do is it would push for a universal, a third party that would be in charge of the gerrymandering process or part of the district drawing process. This way, you'd actually be accountable to your people. Because if you just pick your voters, you can just say whatever you want, and then your voters are going to vote for you no matter what your policies are. So it doesn't give an opponent any chance to just run against you, because it doesn't matter what they say. You already have all the voters decided for you. And even this goes into further, because they just argued before the Supreme Court yesterday about it, and the lawyers for the Republicans said that, look, we need these voter ID laws because it does not give us a fair advantage. It puts us at a disadvantage if more people are allowed to vote, and that's the problem. So the whole point of this bill is to allow more people to vote, and I think I've done a good job of explaining what's wrong with each of these little pieces. Another one is it says it allows D.C. to be a state, yet it doesn't do that. So what it does is put a recommendation into D.C. being a state, which it should be, because those are American people. They don't have really any representation. They have one congresswoman, but she's mostly there as a symbolic vote. She doesn't really have any power. They don't have any senators. And this argument, we just give Democrats 2 senators. It's like, why? It doesn't say, there's no legislation for D.C. being a state that says Republicans can't run in it. You run in it, Democrats win in red districts, Republicans win in blue districts. It happens. So this idea that D.C. being a state would automatically give them 2 representatives doesn't mean anything. It means there would be one more area that would be represented in the country, and you would have a chance to run candidates there. So they could do that. And the same thing goes for Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a territory that has Americans in it, and contrary to Donald Trump's belief that he spoke to the president of Puerto Rico when it was really him, it should be made a state as well. So I think I've done a good job covering this. If you have more questions, or you think there are things that I missed that I should go over in a later video, I'll be happy to do that. Please, comment on this video. Please, send me a message. Once again, if you like this video, please like and subscribe, or feel free to follow me on Twitter @FacesIdeas. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.